Good morning. This is lecture 3 on innovation via tech startup. Thank you for everyone being in class. As opposed to lecture 2, like I just said, there's going to be a little bit more Q&A, and for the people on the tape, I will try hard to repeat the question before I start answering it. We really are progressing. So last time we talked about ideas. I call it recap or wrap up, but as you see, when I go back to the previous lecture, a lot of times I'll emphasize a few new items, so it's not just a review. There is always a little bit more material, and then we'll go through this critical review. Is this really a good idea for a specific use? And a lot of times it is, but you need to have the patience. If the idea that you have is an engineering or a technology idea, you need to have the patience to find the right customer and market for it. That's really what we're going to spend quite a bit of time on today. Some of the feedback was this image was interesting. There were some questions about, okay, so why do we still have that bridge? I had that also via email. And to some extent, these decisions on infrastructures are public decisions. As a professional engineer, I can go see that bridge and tell Department of Transportation that I don't like it, but what are they going to do? They're going to say, do you want to pay for it to replace it? Okay, so it gets circulated. There is a lot of communication about public infrastructure and the risk associated with maintaining them, repairing them. But at the end of the day, it becomes a political decision lots of times. So we have infrastructures in the Boston area that, from an engineering standpoint, you really, really would want to do it again. But it's not up for the engineer to decide. Risk is something very relative, and actually that is the topic of one of the 6-hour module that I listed on Stellar about essentially the use of structural materials. So the spring module that I've been giving, and I made 6 hours of it, really speaks to there's always risk. There's always risk. The question is, what is an acceptable level? And that is, at the end of the day, I guess it's a joint decision. You know, everybody has input into it, and then time is what is a determining factor lots of times. So you want to hope that all those processes of evaluating things like that are fast enough so it gets remediated before something really bad happens. And I've seen a lot of cases when it's, say, a bridge or a structure, a tunnel is considered in critical condition, that now there's just more monitoring. So, and that's actually an example with the Longfellow Bridge that before they did a lot of structural repairs, there was visual inspection every weekend of the bridge for any sign of deterioration, sagging of a beam, more vibration. Is there anything changing on this bridge from one week to the other? It's quite an interesting process, but to some extent, if that is what you have budget for, and you can't shut down the bridge, you do what you can. And that's what a lot of engineers do. So I don't know if that speaks to that question. Okay. One thing that I was hoping will catch your attention is this idea that things do take time. And if you remember last time, I've talked about timing. I showed you my timeline working on a technology for 15 years. And getting to a point where now is what's the next step. So to some extent, you could consider my startup being right there in the valley of death. But hopefully we've been going so fast that we'll just breeze right through it, okay? And that's to be determined. So two things that I had emphasized is coming up with ideas is not a linear process. You work hard, you have experience, you have ideas, and if you've been working so hard and you do have the experience, chances are your ideas are not that bad, okay? Now you gotta have a lot of them, and you can't predict when you get it done. And the entrepreneurship is what becomes important because you're willing to share your ideas even if they may look like, oh my God, this person thinks that they can really change this. It's not going to happen. You know that, and you'll get that reaction. Just be very aware. You'll go out and you'll get it over and over and over again. Now, this is something I added here about why are we able to do this? Why are we able to innovate technologically a lot more than people in other countries, to tell you the truth? We do have strong intellectual property, patents right, trade secret does apply. So if you're doing something and you have a strong team and your suppliers are local people, chances are nobody's going to be able to figure out exactly what you're doing. And you can't do that in every piece of the world. We do have, especially in the Boston area and on the West Coast and in more places actually at this point, this culture of being willing to go out and do something new. It's a great culture to be willing to challenge ideas and what's going on. And there are resources. So it's been told to me that in Europe, for example, if you're a startup and you try to get venture funds, it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder. It's fewer people, less experience, but they're trying. You know, they see the value, they see what's been going on here, especially in the Cambridge area, and it brings value to society, it brings value to the economy. So the big reality on all of this is what people will call time. So I visited a family overseas that was just a different culture, and they were explaining to me, you know, what this meant and what all of that meant. And one of the aspects that I think was very interesting in their culture is they'll always say, oh yeah, I'll work on my house when I have time, you know. And what they meant by that also is money, okay? So, and we've talked about it a little bit last time, you know, this idea that you got to be able to bootstrap and do all these things along the way, get government funding. You have to time the two. So you have to get to a point where you made enough progress that you can get the money you need to get yourself to the next step. And it's a very, very, very tough game, even if your idea may have been good in the first place. So any questions on the general process? Because that really, like this is the seed. This is where you start. You start with ideas and you put yourself out there. So I can share more of my experience. I can do what, I need somebody here to step up and ask me something. Yes?
So I guess what was the biggest leap you had to make through all this process, right? Because that's kind of what we're all afraid to do. So what is that?
What was the biggest leap? It's a very good question. I have to say that I think that because I've been really working to mitigate the risk, that most of the leap were smaller leap than they could have been in other ways. You know, we talked that I didn't quit my job. We talked that, you know, I worked on this on my thesis, then I had somebody else do his thesis on this. Probably it is right now. Right now, no. There was a question about the initial funding was significant. It was not significant given the volume of my business at that point. So it's a very good question, and I think that my answer would be right now, and I'll explain. So right now, I signed a 4-year lease on a building that we painted the color of the company, and we just starting to paint stuff more and more and hiring more. And I am putting myself out there for pass or fail, you know, and it is something that I've been able to, over time, really mitigate, but there is a point where it's harder as things get bigger. And maybe I associate with what you said, but what's the biggest leap here is it's always easier to forget, okay, how hard each step was. So you can take my answer with a little bit of a subtlety here that I really remember all of what happened 2 years ago. It's just been, I know it was tough, and deciding to go to work sometime was just not a great idea because you had so many things that were not like you would like them to be. And I can't say that I have that right now. So, you know, I think that it's so many steps along the way. And there will be definitely example people that say I have to go bolt and quit my job, and that becomes like the determining factor of go, no go. But for me, it's just been really, really gradual. Good question. Okay, so we talked about ideas. You need a lot of them and all that. Any questions on how you get ideas? Any thoughts? Because I'm not the only one that has ideas in this room. I know that. How do you get your ideas? Yeah, yeah.
General brainstorming, talking with people.
Okay, so the answer is that by talking with people, like group conversations. Yeah, yeah. Okay, entrepreneurship, risk. Any questions or comments on that? What's the biggest risk you ever taken?
Related to money.
So the answer was the risk is associated with money. And actually, that's a good one. I have a follow-up on that when we talk about team. Yes. Yeah, one way that so by the way, one thing that was on the calendar for today, it's going to be next time, is more spending a significant amount talking about team building and how to evolve a team to fulfill the need of the startup. What is very interesting is National Science Foundation, they did not say anything about it, even if it is the second cause of failure of a startup. I mean, they sort of did, but they really did not emphasize it. And I think it's because it's tough. Okay, there is no really real set of rules, so we'll talk about that. But in the context of risk, to the extent that I've been leading this now for 3 years, I have taken the biggest risk as well, you know, and that to me made sense. Okay, so now we're having a little bit more fun. The idea is great. You know, you find somebody that says yes, and you have to take it to the steps of making the business model. And we've talked about that here. You need a value proposition. This is the canvas. And one key concept is you have to do that sheet again for every market segment that you're considering. So if you want to make a new kind of cereal for Americans, you need a sheet. If you say you're going to sell it to Europe, you're going to need another sheet. So it's very, and for even a very specific customer segment, you may have more than one value proposition, but you have to be able to really articulate why you think there is one. That's one thing that I've been drilled on, to say, okay, you tell me there are multiples, but which one really is the one that's going to get you to get your first checks? And so that becomes very, very, very specific. So about that, money comes in customer validation. Second step. If you can't get anybody to write a check here, go right back. You haven't found it. I believe in it. You may have exceptions, but I've seen it quite a bit, and it's something that discussed. So we're going to spend a few minutes now with some guidance from Steve Blank, who is a very published author. He has lectures online as well on doing this customer discovery and building a company. So how do you get your first checks? If you can find somebody just like that, early evangelist that has a problem, that they're aware that they have a problem, that they've been really looking for a solution, and they're willing to take it piece by piece. So in other words, they're not willing to say, solve my problem. They're willing to say, okay, well, if you can fiddle that piece of my problem, that may work for me. And then they have a budget. So I thought about it, and you can read all of this, but I thought a couple of things I wanted to emphasize, and then I want to discuss it with you. You never know when you meet somebody for the first time if they are this person. Because if they are, look, they may not want to tell you, okay? If I'm out there at a conference and I've got this budget and I let people know, I won't get my work done, okay? I just won't. There'd be people all around me trying to get my cards, sending me stuff. I just won't be able to get through it. So what do? You take the time that it takes to find those people. And this is the interviews, this is networking. And also in that process, really, you want to show that at the end of the day, you want to help them with their problem. Because otherwise, they'll just walk away before you even know it. So, yes?
Previous chart.
Yes?
Where are you right now?
May? Just right there. We discussed that on the first lecture, between creating the value and capturing the value. So you can take this chart. So the question was, where is my startup right now? And I said right in the middle, because the first two enclosure is the part of creating value. And that was, if you remember, a combination of the technology, but also the customer. You know exactly who wants it, how much they're going to be willing to pay for it, at least at first. And you get some sense in how many people are going to be able to do that. And then you start your customer creation, and we are doing that, but I'm trying to be conservative here. So
What does customer creation mean?
we'll go over that. So there was a question about what customer creation. That's exactly how I'm going to end this lecture today. Yeah, we're going to talk about the first three bullets here today. That's our goal, and the idea though is very, very clear. Is be very, very mindful, and that's actually a good business advice. Is wake up in the morning thinking something great may happen to you. Okay, you may find this person, you may not, but just think like you might. This might be your day. So I can't make that more clear, right? you can't know ahead. You gotta go around, just like a bee, and figure out where are the flowers and what do they need. So it's a very, very, very step-by-step process, and we are going to cover some of those steps. I just decided to go right blunt and say, this is the dream. If you find this, I don't think you're just done. Because that is actually something we're going to talk in sales. If you find somebody that's willing to write a check, don't say, oh, great, I'm done. You take the check, you do the work, okay? It's very, very simple. But a lot of people, if we go back to that chart we discussed, the fourth reason is failure to deliver. Oh, they said yes. Well, not really. So setting expectation is also very important when you find somebody like that. If you're going to write a check, you need to understand what you think you're going to be able to give them, and maybe you even set a low expectation and a high possibility. You see, we may be able to do this. This is the best we're going to be able to do. This we may only be able to do this. So it's clear and understood. And actually, I have a big meeting on that next week. Somebody wrote us a check, and now we have to decide what we can tell them we'll be able to do by the date that they want the money to be spent. It's a good problem to have, but at the same time, it is a very serious conversation, because the last thing you want is that person not wanting to do more next year. So you have to have those discussions. All right, so before you find your first customer, you'll have to decide which market to focus on. In other words, if you're just going around thinking that for your solution you'll find this person without really focusing on that market segment, you're taking a very high risk. So in our case, this has been more than a year of work of getting the first person with all these criteria to do something. Maybe it was 18 months, 4 meetings, just for $3,000, which didn't even cover the time of talking to them, leave alone doing the work. Okay, so we're thinking about, this is the topic, we're thinking about which market segment we're going to go and do some work in. It's guessing until you start having some information, and I made that graph. It's, I think, a work in progress, because I wanted to include some of the important parameters here. So how much you're going to be able to do for the amount of work, okay? And then you balance that against actually how much total money you're going to be able to get. So there's some rules of thumb that if you are thinking that in 5 years your market segment is not going to be, say, $10 million, that may just not do it, okay? Because of all the work that's going to go into making the technology, adapting it, getting intellectual property if you need it, and putting forward either the technology as an infrastructure, let's say it's a new plant, and things like that. You need, if to be able to spend time on this, you need to have found a reasonable size market. Now, it's not to say, one thing that was told to me by the director of my program with the NSF was, if you tell me that you're going to be able to make, say, 2-3 million in sales with one very first niche market, and then you can tie it to something else, that's fine. Because it has to be gradual, but you need to, at that point, to do your customer discovery not just on the $2 million market, but on the bigger market. And if you go to venture capital, they may ask you to be at 200 million or 500 million. And then you have to make those steps for them and put a lot of faith. And financing is very important, so I guess we'll just bring it into the conversation when it's appropriate, and you can ask about it anytime. It's one risk of going for financing. They may distract you. They may say, oh, you need to prove to me that you're bigger than you are. And an honest answer may very well be, well, great, but I can't worry about that right now, in the details, because I've got something that's good enough. I mean, what I mean is good enough. I put this is a niche market, this is where you start. And if it's good enough in the sense that it's big, multi-millions, and it leads you to something else, now you start worrying, how complex is it? How much work is going to be needed to be able to fulfill the problem in that market? can we get to the position of actually being able to make sales, or do we need to partner with someone to do that? Because that's going to have a lot of implications on how you're actually going to succeed in trying to move fast and efficiently. And then how fast you think when your solution is ready, it's going to take to get accepted. Let's say you're in aviation. Good luck, because it's going to be completely ready. And then there's going to be years of trials and full-scale testing before you actually make anything more than, let's say 5 parts or 10 parts. I mean, I'm making up the number for you, but the composite development for big aircrafts, if it hadn't been for the government putting money and defense putting money, we wouldn't have them today. Okay, it just wouldn't happen. And it is the case when you think a lot about material. I mean, we have these aluminum alloys. They're great. But do I really want to make a startup making a new kind of aluminum alloy? Depends for which market. If I find a market that's going to accept it and adopt it in a timely fashion, okay. Otherwise, to me, these become the no-go. It would be great. And you can feel good thinking that if you succeed at what you're doing with your niche market, one day it'll be used for that. But you can't get any money for that. Yes?
So how do you manage that scoping between, like, you're talking about the early adopters, people investing early versus what you want to do? How do you kind of manage that scope of what's all happening? Because I feel like there might be different directions that they two would want to go. So
Yeah. The question is more or less, how do you funnel all these possible things that you could do with your time in the early stage of the startup? And it's a very good question because, and I'll circulate with you a thought that I've had, and actually I haven't found it, but it may help us with our discussion. So let's say I'll put a little bit of a cloud here, because somebody mentioned about you have a brainstorming session with other people. So you go around, and we'll talk that more in product development. But it is so important. So you do that, but just that is never going to get you anywhere. So at the end of the day, or at the end of that week, or at the end of that month, you may want to boil it down to, okay, 3 things. I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, I'm going to try that. And this, we can always do. Okay? But yeah, you have to go from a bunch of ideas, and you can't take them all. There's kind of moving pieces here. And then you do take them one at a time. I mean, it's how we are all time efficient. We have so many things we can do, but then we put a priority list. And maybe you're lucky that the first one you try here, number 1, say, I love talking, so make a call. You don't. And about your idea, you're saying, well, maybe this could be used for this. So who can I call? And this could give you another call, or it just puts you at a real stop sign, and that's great. Okay, because so say you have a yes here, or you have a no. One thing that one of my mentors told me is the no is the second best answer to a yes. Okay? It really is. It feels good. It feels like, okay, now I'm going to move to number 2. So does that answer a little bit? Because you can't, in other words, you can't be with a piece of paper thinking that you're going to all figure that out. So you have to do a little bit with your piece of paper or in your mind, and you put some action item, and you just go again and again. And those cycles, oh boy. At the beginning with our company, over a week, we'll have to go back to that box here.
did you guys take the first no, though?
If we took the first no, yes, we did. Yes, we did. Somebody said, oh, for bridges right now, for the price you want to charge, I'll just rather do a cutout. And we said that's fine, thank you. And we spent 20 minutes talking about whether we were going to do bridges first. That was it. But I was able to make the right call. Somebody that everybody would go to him anyway. So his opinion mattered. It was just a matter of explaining and being willing to take the hit. Yeah, you just don't know. He could have said, "Oh, well, I have these 5 bridges that I can't take anything out of it," and it still bugged my mind. I still have this idea that there are bridges out there, and I've seen pictures of it. You can't cut out of this one piece, so we'll go back to it, right? But for now, it's been pushed aside. Yes.
Calling companies, like which part of the company do you like communicate with?
Oh, very good question. So when you make a call, where do you call? Boy, you need a lot of friends, my friend. Yeah. That's all. I mean, it depends which market, okay? But for business to business sales, just blank calling a company, you will have to be better than I have. I have not really done that much. What I've mostly done is, for a market segment, find somebody that can lead me to the next call. That's simple. Like, you guys are taking this class. Let's say you say, well, this is my idea, and we'll go over that, and this is what I'm thinking. I would just say, okay, well, I'll put you in touch with this one guy, and he tell you something, and we'll go through that later. That's a very good question. But the bottom line is, you don't know. If you're going to blank call, you have to be very prepared. You have to show your knowledge in what you have. If you're able to do that, and it's really something that a company needs, chances are you'll get to talk to the right people. Yeah, you would. Yeah. But it's going to be tough. If you're going to do that, I say go ahead and go to a conference. If you don't know anybody, you find the conferences in a market segment that you know you got to find somebody here that will tell you something. That's people are there. Exhibition booths. They'll tell you all about it. It was the best thing we did. That really launched our discovery process. Just showing up, asking questions, showing what we had. Okay, so let's hear it. So pipelines is what I've been focusing on. So what I'm going to do for the next 5 minutes, really, and I'll take some questions, is kind of give you a little bit the pitch to get some attention in those companies. Slide's not too bad here in terms of quality. We have more than 300,000 miles of high-pressure oil and gas transmission pipeline in this country, and they are 5 times cheaper to use than rail cars and 20 times cheaper than trucks. So, and this gets people very silent when I speak even to a technical audience. If we don't have those pipelines, we don't have an oil and gas industry, really. And we really have a problem with our economy. We do, because the oil and gas industry is a big part of our GDP. So, are we having a problem if we can't have pipelines? Yes, we do. We do. And to some extent, that is the bottom line value proposition for that industry. Anybody in that industry with enough money at stake will realize that, yes, they may be a public company and have to report certain profits at the end of the year, but a lot of these people are also involved with new projects, and there's actually going to be, a lot of construction going on in the country for a while, which is great. But how you get all your authorization, states have a lot to say on what's going to happen or not. And what a lot of times shows up is prior incidents, things that did not go the way they should. That just looks bad. When you look at this happened in San Bruno in year 2010. It was a natural gas transmission pipeline that ruptured over more than 20, 40 feet. So when that happens, NTSB, so the National Safety and Transportation Board, get involved to find out what happened. and they'll go back and find out other things that happen the same way, and they come up with recommendations, and the industry has to respond to it. Now, if it's a very, very, very strong industry that's been there for years and years doing things a certain way, it takes a lot of time. This is year 2010, guys. It's been 7 years that the government told the industry, you have to do something with those old pipes because we don't like them. And they could be replaced, but replacing 300,000 miles at, let's say, $2 to $5 million miles is not realistic. So the pipelines were put in the ground at a time where there wasn't that many homes around them, not that many other utilities. So it wasn't expensive to put them in the ground in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But now, taking them out and putting new one is a very, very expensive proposition. It's being done when necessary. But otherwise, so what we are offering as a technology is get information about the remaining strength and also the toughness, so the rupture resistance of that steel. And it is a type of information that is not currently available. So this is where the decision makers have to make a lot of assumptions, because if they're going to try to get the information from the existing pipe, they don't have records, a lot of them. They don't know what was put on the ground in the 40s, 50s, 60s. They go and they put an inline tool in the pipe. They figure out the diameter. They know roughly where the pipe is. They'll put sensors. They track it back. They put it on a map. And they can collect information about thickness by running a tool inside the pipeline. That's very inexpensive because you say you're flowing gasoline, so you put what they call a smart pig. It's this little device that just floats with the gasoline. So you put it in and you pick it up hundreds of miles down and it collects a lot of information. So it will look for cracks. It will look for wall thickness reduction. But now if you want to say what's the strength of that steel, that's not this little moving thing that's going to give it to you precisely. There are tools that try to do that, electromagnetic methods. But what's been done is hydro test the line, which requires a shutdown and putting water into it. Very, 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 very expensive for a lot of applications. The cutout requires you to work when the line is in service, and you see it schematically. So essentially, if you're going to take a piece of metal and bring it to the lab to test it, you essentially have to install on this big valve that allows you to cut in the seal environment. So you see in the orange here, that's a little bit of a circular cutting saw that allows you to get a core piece or a round piece that's got a little bit of a curvature. I can bring some of those. And you do it sealed, so the pipeline is still being used. Very expensive. Very expensive to get a piece of metal that way. And the reason you don't shut down the pipeline is you need a constant supply of energy, but also the way the pumps are set up or the compressor station, it's a very, very expensive proposition to shut down the pipeline. It creates fatigue cycles because it's essentially a big pressurized vessel that now you unpressurize and pressurize again. So we talked about trying to make it simple for the end users, and I think we can agree here that I'm not disclosing any intellectual property by saying we're going to have this little tool that's going to go on your pipeline and figure out the information instead of doing a cutout. What does it work for you? But also, when are you going to do it? Because if it's going to take another 10, 15 years, we're moving on. It's tough, but so you have to decide which is the most pressing question. And I think for this one, it wasn't so much exactly how much they'd be willing to pay. I think it's understood that there is value. The biggest challenge is the timing on getting that through the process. And can't really worry too much about that here. This is kind of our problem as a company. So and then one slide so we're clear. So we have a tool that goes on the pipeline. We really strap it, ratchet straps, and our customer love this because they say this is very simple. They also say you guys didn't spend too much time, working out this automation when we don't need it. This goes into a Pelican case, so we fly with it. We go to the site. They cleaned up the pipe already. We have to finish the preparation, put the machine on, 12 minutes, and we get data. So it's not super hard to explain that part. What becomes really, really key, though, at that point is, okay, we'll give them data. What are they going to be able to do with it, right? Because they're only going to pay for something that they can use. And that is really where the discussion has to be centered around when you're talking with those customers. It's not so much about how great your tool is in our case, it's really is what are they going to be able to do if they do hire you to go and do this. So we think we found them. And this is a key slide here. Well, before we go there, because it's very easy. Any questions on what we have been doing? Yes?
You talked about expanding into other markets. Are you going to continue focusing on just pipes, or once this catches on, are you looking at jumping back onto bridges?
The very good question was, as a company at this point, are we going to continue to just focus on this, or are we going to start branching out? And here's the answer. We are starting to branch out carefully without losing our focus. So the first thing was the oil and gas pipeline. It is going to be 85% of our focus this year. And then we have already decided to work for quality assurance on additive manufacturing, and it's because we got a check. It's that simple. So I'm becoming a little bit more blunt with things, that I'm just not going to work on something until I really get some form of real commitment, because we're very, very busy. But at the same time, yes, because everything takes years between starting to have the interaction, getting the first check, to really be able to boost up. There's no reason for not spending some time, in my opinion. But this is a matter that people would potentially disagree on. This is not good.
Do you find that now that you've had some success in oil and gas, you have people from other industries coming to you? Is that how you got into the defense stuff, or?
A little bit. Yeah, of course. Of course, you want to capitalize on the status that you already have. So the first time we went for additive manufacturing, we took our brochures from what we were doing. We didn't try to adapt it. Whether it was a mistake or not, I can't say, because we did get more support after that. So it did work out. This is interesting, because if I keep it plugged, I really, really have a hard time going back and forth. Okay, good. That's what it wanted. But to speak to your question again about how we're going to go from the niche to the bigger market, we're back here. Right now, we're back here. We've already found number 2, but when you look to number 3, 4, and 5 on this list here, I could change that order. I'm willing to do that. I could probably update the slides, just put a question mark on it. Which one's number 3, right? One of our mentors says, or advisors says, 3, because of all the nuclear plant that will have to be decommissioned in the next 10 years. So it's a huge, 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 huge cost to shut down all of those. And because it is a slow industry, if 10 years is decommissioning, I mean, now or next year is the time that you really have to start working on a solution. And because it's so important for them, they should be essentially supporting us making the necessary adjustment. And essentially, what this market would require us to do is to have a crawler type system that doesn't have to be operated by someone. It's quite a proposition, but everything is possible if somebody really needs it.
Then would you look to partner with people for the crawler part, or are you looking to develop it all in-house? Because it seems like your core competency is the inspection piece versus the...
It's a very good question. So the question is, how are we going to do it? Well, the very, very most important thing first is, are we doing it? Okay, it doesn't matter so much at this point whether we would be making the tool, whether a partner would be making the tool. We have people coming to us all the time these days saying, oh, can I put your tool in my thing, you know? But they'll say that because they see the excitement around what you're doing, but they're not going to have the budget to be able to do it. So it's going to be on us to make the business case. And that's the most important part, because building the tool is going to happen. And so instead of answering your question directly about exactly how we're going to do it, I cannot worry about it. All I have to worry about is when they're going to need it, and are you going to be able to support along the way, given that this is going to be, say, a 3 to 5 year process. It's just not going to happen like that in terms of getting it adopted and approved as the way to extend life. Yeah. It's easy to make the tool to get in there, but what's the hard part, and that's something that we discussed even with pipelines, is, okay, so we get data, what are they going to do with it? In the case of nuclear, was there any damage from the radiation to embrittle the metal, for example, things like that. So it's very, very specific, very hard to get those pieces of material. They don't want to shut it down, but guess what? They may have to shut one down. So we have plenty of material to work with. It's going to be an interesting discussion, but that's the discussion at this point that I feel is important in order to be able to prioritize between that and the larger volumes. There's a lot of facilities in this country using pressurized vessel that are vintage. They have incidents sometimes, but the volume is so large that before we get there, the technology price is going to have to be significantly lower. They're not going to be able to pay the same price. And they could cut a piece. They do shutdowns on those. But so the value of the non-destructive tests becomes less sort of going down that road here. I mean, if you make one part in additive manufacturing, what's the use of destroying it? So there is value there, definitely. If you're in a hurry, now you got to make two to get one. I wouldn't want to do that. Very good questions, guys. Okay, so what I think I need to do, we talked a little bit about that, is I want to wrap it up and answer some of the first questions that was asked. And we'll talk about how to get to people later. So one very good question that was asked is, how do you go from one step to the other? And we're ready for that. So you've done your customer discovery, customer validation, early sales, get a check, or 2, or 3, or 4. And then if you're ready to move to the next step, now you scale the demand for that very same market. So they were very good questions that were asked at the beginning, and that's why I am going there. And probably the most important part for everybody to keep in mind is, according to Steve Blank and to some extent the National Science Foundation, you don't build a company until you're there. You can call yourself a company, but you are a startup. It's hard, but if it's been 3 years, you'll think that people will all have that, director of something and all sorts of good things. But it's a very, very intensive process. More questions about the example? Because we spent a little bit of time on that today. We are been doubling our sales from 2016 to 2017. This year is probably going to be 3 times, and definitely 5 times the volume of work. So this is where we are here of scaling for these same customers. And then when that is fully demonstrated, we can go to the market with the solution, just taking on a larger number of customers. And really the value, and it's something that I really, if you're on the opposite side and you're looking at a company like us, this is the time to get involved, because this is where a lot of the figuring out happens and how helpful we're going to be able to be. When it is a company, things are not going to be as flexible. So we go and collect data. We're happy to talk about how we're going to report it. 2 years from now, here's the report. This is how it is. It's all prepackaged at that point. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.